Being sick on your big day is a nightmare. And for me, my big day is when I'm at Disney. In today's episode, we are talking about getting sick at Disney.
Welcome to Always Planning Disney, where planning is half the fun. I'm Cheryl.
And I'm Melissa.
And on this channel, we talk through all of the details that go into making our vacations magical.
Although this is probably slightly less magical.
This might be our least magical topic so far.
Right. But it's an important topic because it happens. And actually, on our last trip, it's something that both of us faced.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately.
Yeah. And I made it probably partway through the trip. I think it was around day 3 or 4 where I started to feel really run down. And at first I blamed it on Universal because, as we've talked about before, we interrupted our Disney trip for a quick little 2 days at Universal, and the walking feels more intense there. It's less peaceful, less calm. And so I just figured it was Universal that did it to me. But then I woke up in the middle of the night feeling pretty feverish. And my plan was just to go back to sleep and burn it off. Usually when I get sick, I can pop a fever real fast and I'm better the next day. That was my plan. But I still woke up feeling horrible. And that was our Epcot day. And that's my favorite, most important day. But there was no way I could do it. And I remember, like, we're all waking up, laying in bed, and I told them, I'm like, I can't go. I'm like, I feel like I need to go home. Like, this is not. And then my kids started crying. So we ended up skipping the morning. I stayed back at the hotel where I spent a fair amount of time in the exterior hallway of Pop Century crying while my family was at the pool. But around the time after lunch, I was feeling better, like oddly better. And so we were able to get in the second half of the Epcot day. And even though it was a major blow, the rest of the trip, I was just more tired than anything and incredibly sore. I was so sore. And I always have Motrin with us when we travel because you never know when you're going to need it. So I just Motrined up to kind of kill the pain a little bit. And we went on with it. So even though I wasn't horribly sick all those days, it was uncomfortable, not as much fun as it could have been, and it's something I never would have anticipated. Although I guess sometimes this is going to happen when you prefer to travel during cold and flu season.
Yeah, that's the hard part about the best time to travel from the Midwest is right during cold and flu season because you're escaping the winter here. But it is sort of a gamble, and I was so worried that we weren't even going to make it to Disney because there were some kids in my son's preschool class that were sick in the days and weeks leading up to our trip. And their parents were sending them to school while sick. And yeah, I mean, this was pre-COVID. I hope we've all learned to do better now. But so I knew that was happening, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be real mad at these parents if we wind up with a sick kid and it messes up our Disney trip. But actually, I was the one sick before our trip. I had a pretty nasty cold leading up to it. And of course, we had been planning this trip for a while. I was really ready for the perfect vacation. And so I was worried that this was going to really mess up our trip. And I rallied before we left, and I thought, oh, well, that's that. Like, I'm past the cold, it's fine. But somehow that same cold, I think I'm not a virologist or whatever, but it felt like the same cold came back at the end of our trip on our last park day. And I had also been having headaches a lot of our trip, and that had been impacting both my ability to wear my tiara and also my ability to go on certain rides and do other fun things. So I was just feeling pretty crummy the last day of our trip. So we were already in the park when I was really feeling bad, and we had gone back for midday nap time. And since we're having a downer episode, I'm going to share the biggest downer of our last trip. And that's that we were staying at Animal Kingdom Lodge during a stage of their renovations where they had fire alarm testing. And so they were testing these fire alarms, not just real quick, but every day for multiple hours on end. And it was during prime nap time. So we thought that the fire alarm testing was done for the length of our trip. And so we had skipped a whole bunch of naps earlier in the trip. This day, everybody in our party needed a nap. And so we were heading back and I was real desperate for one. And then all of a sudden the fire alarms went off. So I was alone with my kiddo in the room at the time because people were doing other things. So I grabbed my kid and like ran down the stairs and outside. And we just sat by the giraffes and I was sobbing because I was so tired. I felt terrible. I really needed to sleep. And so I was crying in front of the giraffes until a really sweet cast member came over and asked if I was all right and tried to help me out. So that was rough and terrible. We did wind up going back to the Magic Kingdom for the remainder of the day, but I didn't have a very good time there. I just wasn't feeling well enough to eat much, and I couldn't really go on rides because I didn't feel well. So it would have been much better to stay back and rest like you did, but I didn't really have that option because my hotel room was uninhabitable because there were sirens blaring all afternoon. So I kind of had to tough it out that time. And then the next day we were flying back home and I was coughing and I had really bad ear pressure, which is not normally a huge issue for me. And I noticed after I got off the flight that I still had this ear pressure, which was weird. So I actually wound up going to the doctor the next day and I guess had an ear infection, but I think there must have been some other stuff going on. Had a cough for a long time. And I actually did wonder after the fact, because we both went on our trips in early to mid-February 2020, when now we know COVID was in the United States at that time, even though we didn't really know about it yet. I remember reports on the TV as we were flying down that like this was happening elsewhere in the world, but of course not here and of course not in Disney World. So I did wonder after the fact, like maybe it was COVID, or maybe it was just one of the many other viruses going around at this time of the year. Whatever it was not a fun way to spend my last few days at Disney.
I had the same thought that maybe it was COVID, and I actually got antibody tested, but pretty far after the trip to the point where I don't know if it would have been accurate. And that turned up negative, but they said if I was as far out from when I thought I had it as I was, that it wouldn't show up anyway because the antibodies don't hang out that long. But yeah, I wondered the same thing looking back. And I remember before we went out, my daughter wanted us all to have face masks for that flight because COVID was starting to hit the news. And I asked a friend of mine whose husband works in a hospital if she could like score some good ones for us. And at that point, they were already under lock and key. So we just got like the dad going into the OR room sort of cheapo, less effective mask. That's what we got.
But hey, better than nothing, right? We wouldn't
Yeah.
have even thought of bringing a mask with us.
Nope,
Oh, how
never.
times have changed.
I know. And what's kind of interesting is when I was thinking about this topic and planning for this episode, over the last week, I had horrible sinus pressure, which is a norm for me. When the seasons change, I'm knocked out for a couple days. I don't really get the congestion, but there's something about the pressure in the air that just wipes me out. And I felt feverish. I felt so much like I did at Disney the last time, but I never had a fever because I was at home and had a thermometer so I could check. But what I found is that if I was doing anything at all, even just sitting and working on my laptop, after about 3 hours, I would need to rest. I was just so exhausted from the pain. And again, I was on a ton of Motrin, as that pain settles into your teeth, it's so distracting. So I'm kind of looking back, I'm thinking that perhaps I wasn't as horribly ill as I felt at the time, but rather it was the lack of rest that was making me feel so bad. And what a recurring theme we have talking about building and rest time.
Yes, and that's what we had tried to do with our trip, right? We had tried to build in naps every day, and because of this fire alarm testing at our hotel, we couldn't do that. So I do wonder if we had been getting that daily rest like we had planned on, would I have felt so terrible by that point in the trip? It's hard to say.
Yeah. And then, sort of related to illness, allergies are something I didn't think of one of the first times that we went to Disney as a family, because I have two allergy sufferers in my group. One is my daughter, it's very seasonal for her. And I didn't bring any allergy meds because it was January in Michigan at home when she usually doesn't need them. And we got to Florida and she was allergic to many things. In particular, I can't remember which ride or attraction it was, but the outdoor section of the line had a lot of plants around it, and she was very allergic to something in
Oh,
there. And she was sniffing, and her nose is running, and we don't have tissues. And the people in line around us were giving us all types of dirty looks, but it was allergies. She was allergic to something in the line. So I learned from then on to also bring the allergy medicine.
that is really good advice. And I think even if you were traveling during a normal allergy season where you live, you have to keep in mind you're going to encounter different allergens in Florida than you would wherever you're living, right? So even if you're, not feeling like you need to take allergy medicine at home, you're having like a better month or something like that, it might be completely different in Florida. I've also heard of people having trouble during the Flower and Garden Festival because there are so many flowers around and a lot of pollen in the air. So I think it's always good to bring some allergy medicine along for everybody in your party, just in case something sets somebody off.
And looking back, I think that this trip was the Flower and Garden Festival. So perhaps that's why she had such a rough time, the poor thing.
Mhm.
So, in addition to packing all of the medicines that you may need, I wanted to also talk about trip insurance. I always get it for big trips like Disney because I've spent a lot of money on it. And I did try to claim on it this last time, but I couldn't because we didn't actually go home. You have to leave in order to recoup the money. And I tried to explain to them, like, you don't understand. I missed half a day at Epcot. Like, I should get half my ticket back. It's Epcot. But trip insurance people do not care. That did not work, and I got $0.
Mm, that's good to know. I did not get trip insurance our last trip, and I really regretted that. Partly because I was starting to get nervous about kids in the class getting sick, partly because I was getting sick. And then, COVID hit a few weeks after we got home, and I thought, oh my gosh, if this trip had been just a little bit later, it would have been canceled entirely. So I will absolutely be pursuing trip insurance next time, but I need to find an option that's going to work with DVC point rental because I don't think that's something that every travel insurance company covers. It's a little different situation because you're not paying cash direct to Disney. So I think that there are options out there that will cover point rental, but if not, even if I'm getting coverage for our park tickets and our plane tickets and all of that, that's better than nothing.
I like the idea of trip insurance before the trip in case something happens, even an injury or a broken bone that would make that trip miserable, that we would be able to still have a Disney vacation and not lose out on the money or have to deal with any sort of reservation blips in terms of it being a last minute cancellation. My concern is what I would do if something happened once we were already there. That would be big enough where we might have to go home. That's very depressing to think about and also logistically difficult. So I'm glad that on this last trip the illness was pretty minor because I don't know what I would do. I would probably just like curl into a ball, melt, ask somebody else to fix it for me.
That's what I'm wondering is what do you do if you really are that sick? Because we live far away from Disney World. And so do you stay in your room and try to ride it out until you feel well enough to travel? Or do you find another way to get home? If you're contagious, like you don't want to be on a plane, especially once we're through this pandemic and masking isn't required. So like I don't want to be exposing other people to, if I picked up a norovirus or something like that. Like I certainly don't want to share that around, but it's also a really long drive from Florida back here to Minnesota, and if you have a stomach bug, that sounds terrible. So I'm not really sure what you would do. I guess we just hope we don't find ourselves in that situation.
I know. We'll just hope that it doesn't happen. And that'll protect us forever.
Always planning Disney, except let's not plan for this part.
Right. So my final takeaway from thinking about being sick at Disney is it's important for me to continue to always pack those painkillers and allergy meds and really anything else we could possibly need, things for upset stomachs, gas X. I'd rather have it all and not need it than need it and not have it, especially because the markup having to go buy even an Advil at the hotel is just going to add anger on top of illness. And I don't want that. And I'm still going to continue to get the insurance, but I think that looking to our future trips, we need to consider having rest time during the day instead of a dedicated rest day. I have found that even if I'm out and about for like 4 hours at a time, I just need to sit for a little while. And so I'd rather have rest throughout the day than one whole rest day to try to make up for all of that time running around in a park.
I completely agree. We definitely want a slower trip next time, more opportunities for rest. I'm hoping that we do have some dedicated rest days involved, but also things like sit down meals or finding a place to plop down and people watch for a little while and not the constant go 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 that our last trip wound up being. So definitely more opportunities for rest, which I think will let our bodies recover and fight off whatever is coming at us through the crowds in Disney. I also think a big takeaway for me is that on our last trip, I carried hand sanitizer with me and I made everyone sanitize their hands before any time they ate anything. And I felt good about that. I don't feel as good about that now that I've been through a global pandemic. So I'm going to be demanding actual proper hand washing before any time we eat and not just hand sanitizer. And I'm also going to be doing your plane boarding ritual to like sanitize our whole row of seats. I will be the lady with the Lysol on my plane. I'll also say if I were in a similar situation where I had a cold during the trip, but I was still able to go into the parks, I would mask. And this is going to be like our grandparents coming out of the depression. This is me coming out of the pandemic is if I'm sick, but I'm well enough to be in public, but I don't want to be spreading my germs around, I'm going to mask. And that's just going to be me for the rest of my life. And that includes Disney, because I think there are times where we're well enough that we can be out in the world, but we don't need to be spreading our germs around. So that's something that I would do. I don't care if I get weird looks or anything like that in the post-pandemic world. I'll be doing that. And the last thing that I actually did this last time, and I will continue to do it in the future, is I took the day after our trip off work to recover from it, just to sleep in and do the laundry and settle back into our house. And that wound up not being what I did. I just stayed in bed all day because I was sick, and I actually took the rest of the week off because I was sick. But I will continue having that day to just kind of recover and ease back into my everyday life. And I think that's just good from a sort of wellness perspective as well.
I will agree to that. I start the laundry as soon as we walk in the door. Like the bags go straight to the washing machine with me and I begin, and it's the only way it will get done in a timely manner, but it just adds more exhaustion onto, having a full week vacation, flying home. So I like the idea of the day off after the trip to recover. Thanks so much for tuning in. Let us know in the comments how you handle illness at Disney. And remember to like and subscribe to plan along with us.